Bienvenidos, Ushamtit, and welcome Anne Arundel Community College learners from the spring 2023 semester taking the CTS 233 Section 400 Network Programmability course. This is the Cisco Networking Academy's Dev ASC 200-901 Certification Exam Preparation course, and this is going to be our final video on Lab 3.4.6 Python Classes Review. And in Part 5, that is exactly what we're going to do. So here's what you're going to learn in this video. We're going to go over the circle class.py script, which I've already created, so we don't have to watch me type. We're going to break down each portion of that script, and then I'm going to show you, using a class with inheritance, how you could create an entire Cisco inventory system for routers, switches, and access points. And we're going to see that ChatGPT can produce that for you as well. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in. So here is the circumference or the circle class.py script. Again, we can see at the very beginning here, we have our class definition. And then we have our three methods. Now remember, the methods look exactly like functions, but when they're tied to the class, when they're inextricably linked and part of the class, they are methods. So we have our constructor method right here. Remember, that is the button inside of the class factory that says, fire it up and let's start producing some objects out of this class factory. So this is our magic method, or the dunder init, and we're going to pass in an argument here, which is the radius. Now remember, self is simply referring to the name of the object that you are instantiating. So circle 1, when we instantiate it, that is the self. And then the radius that we are passing in is the value inside the parentheses. And then we're simply going to leverage the print circumference method to print out the following statement: the circumference of a circle with a radius of whatever we entered in. We do some typecasting here, right? Because we're going to be sending in integers. So we tell it, hey, we know the radius value is an integer, but let's go ahead and use a string. And then we do that later on, and I'll slide over here in a second, but we're basically just going to instantiate 3 circles, each with a different radius, 2, 5, and 7, and then our program in the second method is going to go ahead and be referenced here. Now you might be wondering, well, wait a second, and let me clear the screen here because we've got a lot of lines flying all over the place. So you might be saying, well, wait a second, what about that method there? Where is that getting called? Well, it gets called right here in the print circumference method. And you can see we call self.circumference. Well, what is the self? Well, the self is the object name, and the circumference is what? Well, remember, we passed a radius value in, and so up here, self.radius gets used, and we basically do pi times the radius times 2. And then we return, just like we did in our functions, right? Here in the method, we return the circumference value. That way, it can be used later on. Where later on? Well, let's clear the screen here, and let's slide. Oops, sorry. Let's, I guess I'll just walk it over here with the cursor. So if we walk over, oops, sorry. We walk over here at the end, you can see we've got the self.radius, and that's what's going to be returned, and the string my circumference, right? You can see we're going to typecast this value here, this variable name, my circumference. Well, where did that come from? Well, let's fly back over this way. And that's what captured the value that got returned when we invoked the method circumference, right? Now, remember, we have to return the value because if we don't, just like a function, this method, if I don't say return circumference, this method gives me nothing back. In fact, if I was to remove that line, or instead of remove it, we could just comment it out. Let's comment this line out, right? Let's not return the circumference value, which is pi times the radius squared there. And so what are we going to do? Or pi times the radius times 2. So what if I save this and we say run without debugging? All right, it's none, right? Because by default, functions and methods would return none. And it's not nothing, right? It's returning none, which means no value. I'm not returning anything to you. So let's fix that. Let's go back up here and say File, Save, and then run without debugging. What do we get? And there you have it. The circumference of a circle with a radius of 2 is 12.256, so forth and so on. And so that is how you would go ahead and create this file, and those are the working parts. And what are we doing? We're instantiating the object, and then we're leveraging the method that is inextricably linked and part of this object called print circumference, which then goes ahead and does its thing. It calculates the circumference by calling the circumference method, assigning the value that is returned from the circumference method into this variable here that we then typecast to a string, and off we go with our print statement. Very straightforward, very, very simple. Now, let's take a look at a Cisco inventory system for routers and switches and access points. Now, the reason I wanted to show you this is because not only did ChatGPT produce this verbatim, but it shows us inheritance, right? Or subclasses. And the reason we have subclasses here is all because of that little guy right there. That super open parent, close parent, dot, magic method init, right? So here is the main class device. And these are subclasses that are referencing or inheriting the attributes of the main class. Now, this is about as deep as we're going to go because for this class, we really don't need to understand inheritance and that super dot init that we see there. But just know that this is a great way to take a look at the code and say, oh, I see what's happening here. So I've got these subclasses, switch, router, access point, that are inheriting from the device class its attributes, and then I can go ahead, I could extend those attributes. So for a switch, right, if we go back up here, let's take a look at something that's interesting. So the device, what are the attributes? Model, iOS version, hostname, IP address, and serial number. So those are common among these three other classes here, or these three other objects: a router, a switch, and an access point. So we inherit all of those, but in addition to that, the router might have a WAN interface that all the other devices might not have. So for here, we extend that, right? And we say, yeah, well, I'm going to add a WAN interface in addition to all of these other attributes that come with the device class. And the same is true for a switch. It's going to have VLANs. Router might not have VLANs, right? And again, this is ChatGPT making its best guess. You know, if you've got specific interface cards in your router, sure, you could have VLANs. But, you know, for all intents and purposes, switches are going to have VLANs. Routers, access points, maybe not. But an access point is going to have a Wi-Fi standard. It is 802.11ac. Is it 802.11g? Is it 802.11n, right? What is it? But this is a great way to take a look at how you might take the next step into, well, how would I go ahead and do inheritance or subclasses? And this is a great way to look at that. And then we've got the class inventory here, right? And this is going to instantiate a list for us. And a list of what? Well, a list of devices probably. And as we scroll further down here, we can see that, oh, we instantiate router 1. We instantiate switch 1. We instantiate AP1. We pass this information in, right? And what is that right there? Well, that just happens to be the WAN interface. What is that right there? That's the VLAN. What is this right here? Remember, that was where we extended the main class device by using subclasses. And so that we could put this device-specific information that we probably aren't going to see on the other devices. Now, we get down here and we call the inventory class, right? And what do we do? Or we call the inventory class and we create an object called inventory. And then we say add device router 1, Add device, switch 1, add device, AP1. Well, where are we getting these values? Right here. We just defined them right there. And then we get into our print, and we're going to walk through and print a list of all those devices. So let's run this, and let's see what we get. And let's give ourselves a little more room here. So there you go, a list of devices. You've got ISR 4331, you got a Catalyst 3850, which is switch 1, you got an Aeronet 3800, which is AP001. Find device by serial number, because again, we, at the end here, tried to find the device by serial number, and you can see right there, you can see right there, we were looking for that serial number. So maybe your script prompts the user for the serial number using the input function, the input built-in function, and says enter the serial number in. And so when they enter the serial number in, it would then go in and run this code and look for that device. And then maybe you have it print out even more information. Maybe you have it print out all of the information for the device in question. And I'll leave that to you. Or maybe you come over here and you ask ChatGPT, and here was all that code that it printed verbatim, and you say, can you extend this script so that when it prints out the device it found by serial number, that it prints out all of the attributes for that device. And let's see what ChatGPT says here. And now it's probably going to be producing a whole bunch of code. And yeah, so it's going to produce all of the code. But again, you just go back in, we can check with ChatGPT, and then we've got, like I said, you've got like a little starter set of code that you can work with, and then you could start to extend and modify the code and its functionality. All right, well, that is it for, and you can see ChatGPT still firing away here. But we're going to cruise back over to here. So that is going to do it for Lab 3.4.6. This is our final video, and hopefully you've got a much better understanding of just how easy it is to work with Python classes, how easy it is to put methods in the class, and then how easy it is to use those methods to get useful information from the object you instantiated out of that class factory. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you're enjoying the course so far, and as always, I hope to see you in the next video.